Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is James Rostance. James is a B2B marketing powerhouse. After working for the BBC, he specialized in producing video marketing campaigns for B2B businesses to outmarket their competitors and attract loyal clients at scale through social media. His latest book, Sell Without Selling, is coming out next month. James is also the host of the 414, the #1 B2B marketing podcast in the UK. And the reason he's here today is because he has just launched his latest venture, Story Hero, where he'll join the power of story with video to create irresistible story-selling case studies. I actually think James is a bit greedy, because he's got the video company, he's got the #1 podcast, he's got the books, he's got his rugged good looks. Can he at least leave story for the rest of us? Well, here he is. Ladies and gentlemen, James Rostance. James, welcome to the show.
That's an awesome intro. Thank you so much, Francisco. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you.
Yes, as I said to you, I wasn't overly bothered about getting your official bio because getting this type of intro done is one of my things when it comes to podcasting.
It's authentic as well. And you know what? The scripted public speaker bios, send me to sleep. And which is why I was, struggling to send you one. But I'm so glad that you had your own take on that. Thank you.
And I found this sort of by accident because the approach I use, which used to be, I used to talk like a lot of podcasters do, to talk about, please like, subscribe, share, all that stuff that people usually say at the top of a podcast. And I was trying to be amusing with that, and I got tired of it very quickly. And then I said, what if I said something about the guest instead of about, subscribing? And then the guest laughed. I think this was episode, 5 or 6 or whatever. And the guest laughed, and we got off to a much better start when we started talking. And I thought, okay, well, maybe there's something here. Maybe if I can get a laugh straight away. And I've pushed that to the limit now, because with most guests, like we chatted a bit before the recording, with most guests is, hi, I'm going to get started now. When I say this, you're on. And I don't exchange a word with them before. And normally it works. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, because you just launched this company, and as we were chatting before, I reached out to you 9 minutes after you launched the company. I got one of those notifications on social media that it happened. I congratulated you and probably said something nonsensical, and then we got you on here. So I started looking through what's your background with this stuff. So, who's James with story? And I started looking through your podcast, the 414, and I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I could find 3 guests that talk about either storytelling or the emotional, or how you need to connect with clients or customers emotionally. And this was started in December 2019, and there was another one in January 2020. So Paul Cash, Nick Hague, and then you had Jessica Joglio in April 2020. Is this all a coincidence? Did these people have anything to do with this venture you're starting now?
That's an awesome bit of research, and you're bang on the money, I would say there. So, in doing my show, the 414, it's been speaking with all of the different guests that has led me to create ultimately these story-selling case studies, and you've touched on the chap that set this all off for me. It was when I spoke with Paul Cash from Rooster Punk. He's one of the industry's absolute standout leading experts in storytelling, right? And the way he described what the power of story could offer and why it's important, the difference it can make, how it connects with people on an emotional level, that just sold me. And that was hugely pivotal. And from then, I then set about learning about the storytelling, and everything that goes with it, which was a bit of a challenge because I was rubbish at English at school. So I kind of feel like a bit of an imposter in this sense, because I'm academically not qualified to do it. But Paul's talk on story, on the power of story and what it can do, inspired me and gave me the confidence to, I guess, go forward and learn about it. So that's what I've been doing.
So let me take on a couple of things you just said there. First of all, the last thing you said about school and not being qualified, I mean, that's complete nonsense. And I'm going to tell you why, because I'm a complete nerd, and I always read extensively, including things that are perhaps too embarrassing to admit to have read, like role-playing game manuals about vampires and werewolves. But I've got an English literature degree. Okay, the last thing that I can say that I've learned from taking that degree was storytelling. Because that's not, being qualified for it. And there are people that study storytelling in itself. But unless you're one of those people, you can even have degrees in marketing and things of that nature without having gotten much into storytelling the way you're getting in now and I've gotten in a while back. So I think it's a very strange thing, because it's the most obvious communication skill there is. Everybody, oh yes, I love stories. Stories are great. How many people do you genuinely know that are decent storytellers in a personal context, let alone a business one? Like, how many friends of yours genuinely good at spinning a yarn? Most of them are boring as hell.
Yes, and you know what? This journey of discovery, of learning all about storytelling, really taught me that exactly what you've just said there. Storytelling as a skill is very much that, and it's surprising how few people actually possess the ability to do that, understand the structure, all of the wonderful nuances that go into it, to then ultimately be able to reliably script and deliver stories in their truest form. So yeah, it's kind of a mini superpower, I'd say.
That's the language that a lot of people use now. If you look at my website, or even the cover of the podcast art, podcast art is kind of like a superhero inspired thing.
I can see that.
This is what I did. I the name of my podcast and my website and everything is Storypowers, and I had a friend who's a very good graphic artist to design some. It's like, okay, imagine I'm on a stage, but think superhero and do a drawing of that, and that's what the art is. And I say all the time that it's a superpower, and it's the original superpower. It's the one we all had, and we kind of lost. Feel free to steal that. I mean, it's not mine, I'm sure.
I really like that as I guess kind of a cultural reference in a way, because as soon as you said that made me think straight away that actually, and I learned this amongst the research, we as human beings learned to tell stories before we could even speak. And I reference that to us drawing on cave walls. So we're telling stories through pictures. So yeah, in terms of the original superpower, I would definitely agree with that.
But there's something that is perhaps even more basic than the story, the outward story, people drawing on caves or people even talking to each other, which is just that we remember things in stories. And in most cases, we think of things in stories, because it's very difficult. If you just try this exercise, if I give you a number or anything, I give you a picture. Pictures sometimes can tell you enough, but if I give you a number, if I give you a fact, you need more. You need context. And the context is, okay, well, this, and then because of this, then that, and if this thing is causing... which is essentially a story, right? So there's a before, there's an after, and there's whatever you're talking about in the middle. So it's very difficult for us human beings to think without context and consequences. And the difference then is the types of stories we normally will talk about, you kind of stick a conflict in the middle. Because if you don't have that, then it doesn't work. But let me take us a step back. One of the things you say in your website is that case studies, which is something businesses love to use, don't actually work. There's a problem with typical case studies, and obviously story would be the solution. But what is that problem? Why is it that normal case studies don't work?
It's because marketers generally have lost the appreciation of what a case study actually is. And what I found, and actually this was backed up in a wonderful piece of research called the 2019 B2B Buying Disconnect Report. And it revealed that most of the time, case studies are nothing more than adverts thinly disguised as case studies. It's a straightforward, this is the problem I had, and I found the solution. Life is instantly wonderful. I can't speak highly enough about the solution that I've just found. That's an advert. And this is doing a massive disservice to would-be purchasers, because buyers want case studies. Because case studies are hugely valuable because it helps them along their educational journey. It's important to understand that from the customer's point of view. They want to understand the full story, the full route to ownership, what challenges that they're likely to face in this problem or need that they have, what considerations that they need to take on board, what other factors should be factored in with their purchase decision, and also with all of that, creating a set of buying criteria, and they're only able to do that through the education process. And a true case study which tells the full story of the path to ownership, a case study that does that is then serving the customer, and that's what potential customers want. However, in this report, it revealed that buyers disregard the majority of case studies because they know that they're just thinly disguised adverts.
Yeah, one of the things I notice a lot, and this goes for case studies, this goes for a lot of sales pitches, this goes for even a lot of stories, is that I often say that stories need to be relatable, specific, and have emotion. And what I find is that they all go sort of together, that they all interweave those 3 points, but most case studies, they are not specific enough. And by that I mean they don't have enough real life details. So when you're listening to them, they sound like an advert. Sounds like someone is glossing over what the situation is or what the solution is. And weirdly enough, what you need to do to fix that is make it as specific to one human being as you can, because then it feels real. Whereas if you're trying to cast a wider net and go, oh, but I don't want to talk about this one person because she is this way, and then our ideal customers are not always all like her. Yeah, but they don't need to be all exactly like her, but they need to feel that she's a real person. If they don't, then it's going to feel like an advert. And this is often the difference between a really good story and an okay story. The okay story doesn't go into the details, so it becomes more like an overview. And I've said this a ton of times. It's like history class in school, right? It was boring as hell, but then you grow up and you watch Rome or something like that, and you love it because there's all the gory details of what life in Rome used to be like. So I think that's the problem with a lot of case studies. They're just not detailed enough, and because they're not detailed enough, we really struggle to unbelieve them and see ourselves in the struggles that those customers are facing.
I think that's very much the key. And I also believe it's really important to always remember that customers are fundamentally interested in what's in it for them. And I always say that that's not a negative concept by any means, but we're driven to find what's in it for us. And this is why generic advert case studies are just missing the mark, because they're not saying, right, you with your problem or need that you are seeking to solve, this is a body of knowledge that will help you ultimately make an educated and informed decision. And that really should be what marketers are striving to do, because when you do that, you will ultimately be thanked for by the customer because you've given them what they've wanted.
And I think the other problem that we haven't touched on yet is one of the things that you would have learned, I guess, from your conversation with Paul Cash, the MD of Rooster Punk, because if I remember correctly, that whole podcast is about how emotion factors into business decisions. And there is this line from a book called The Happiness Hypothesis, from Jonathan Haidt, where he says that the human beings are, when you're making a decision, a human being is riding an elephant. So the mahout, the little elephant rider on top, is the rational brain, and the elephant is the emotional brain. So as much as the mahout might really want to make the elephant go this way or that way, if the elephant is not engaged in that decision, it's not really happening, because the power differential is too big. And that's the thing with I think case studies or a lot of other business communication that they miss the mark is they're not really appealing to our emotions. They're not engaging us in the way that we need to be engaged to be inspired to action. So that's the problem I try to fight on a regular basis when I try to convince people why they should tell stories, is because it's one of the best ways to engage people emotionally.
100%. And you know what? That's exactly what I did ultimately when I realized that, right, once you appreciate that with a story, it has a structure, because unless a story has structure, it's not a story, right? And there's this critical need to factor in an emotional journey into it as well, because otherwise it's just a delivery of facts and you lose the audience, just like your history teacher did, right? So that's why I realized, okay, right, we need ultimately a structure, and with that a formula for creating case studies that successfully take the viewer on a journey to ultimately deliver all of the information that we need to then finally come to a business decision in your favor for everything that you've taken them through. And I ultimately boil that down to a 9-step formula to be able to do that, to take them through this journey to deliver story-selling case studies.
I'll get to your structure in a second, but a couple of things that came to mind when you were speaking were, the first one is about the journey, and this is something that has become more and more apparent to me the more I learn about storytelling, which is that the end has to be almost the opposite of the beginning when it comes to stories. So I think just today I put out something on social media where I'm talking to a storyteller and he's teaching me how to ruin movies for everybody. And the way he does that is he says, if you know what the beginning is, you know exactly what the end should be. And the example he says he always loves, he says, so when Harry met Sally, but they're saying I hate you in the beginning of the movie. The opposite of that is that they love each other. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one. But then he gives another example, which is of a movie called Bolt, which is a Disney animation. And he says, okay, so he's watching the movie with his kids, and 9 seconds into the movie, he stops the movie and says, this is a movie about a dog who needs to find a home, and he needs to find friends. And his kids say, how could you possibly know that? It's been on for 9 seconds. And he says, well, it's a dog looking sad at the window of a pet shop, and there are no other, like all the other dogs around him are leaving and being taken into a home. So, he needs to be happy. He needs to be out of that pet shop, and he needs to have some other dogs around him, have some friends. So that's exactly it. So I think where people don't realize it sometimes, and a case study would definitely fall short of that, is you need to have that journey of things changing throughout, and it needs to be something you care about. Because if it's not, you can change but not care about changing, then that doesn't matter a great deal.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties in perfectly with the whole concept that it's all about the viewer, about your potential customer, about what's important to them in their world and what they care about.
And how do you... Because this is sometimes it's just a case of the terms we're using, but a case study is a pretty clear example of what it is and why it works or doesn't work. But how do you differentiate what you're doing, which we'll get into more detail in a second, from just a testimonial? What is the difference between what you're doing and just a client testimonial where they're actually being honest and telling us what's the case?
Great question. They are two different marketing assets, very similar, and you do need both of them, absolutely, but they're different assets. So A testimonial, I think, is the kind of the icing on the cake part, or it's the starter, if you will, with the case study being the main course. So, the testimonial is there to give the buyer confidence that the company is a good potential partner, and it's there to provide reassurance that they are indeed a good choice. And actually, storytelling should and does play a part in testimonials. My gripe with most testimonials is that they're very surface level, and a lot of the time, and this is super bad, but you will find testimonials turn into basically a promotion for the person giving the testimonial. Like, hi, my name is Bob. I've been doing the removal business for 15 years. And 60 seconds of the testimonial has gone with Bob talking about his removal business. And this is of no use to me. Whereas, far better to structure a testimonial which tells a story of what their experience was in working with the company, and all of the touch points that matter, such as trustworthiness, timeliness, staying on budget, ability to respond to certain changes that came up. So that's the testimonial, that's what it's for. And with regards to timing, this is really, really important as well. What you'll find is that testimonials are typically binge watched. There we go. So yeah, we're all familiar with binge watching these days, yes. Which is why 60 seconds seems to be the complete sweet spot for them to take into account that they're binge watched, and really you're looking to get an overall view. So short testimonials in quick succession is how you do that, but crucially each one structured to tell a story and to hit certain touch points. Right. And the other side then, but whereas case studies are an asset to specifically help with the education process, to help them with their research, to understand, as I mentioned, the route to ownership, and ultimately giving them everything that they need to make an educated and informed purchase decision. And a case study can only really do that compared to any other. Let me rephrase that. A case study is better able to do that than any other type of marketing asset because of what you can put into it and the fact that you can deliver it as a story. Because when you deliver anything as a story, anything you say within that is accepted without challenge by the audience. And this is in stark contrast to if you're making marketing claims, because when you deliver...
Unless you've arrived at 3 a.m. and you smell like booze, then those stories are not accepted at face value.
Let's add that as a caveat to when... Yes. Yeah. When I've explained this previously, I've said, okay, right, so long as it's not a wild, outlandish claim, then anything you deliver as a story is accepted without challenge. But I'll add your one to the mix there of, unless you turn up at 3 a.m. stinking the booze.
But I make that point often, and the way I've made it is this. I say, a story is accepted unless they have any reason to believe you're a liar. Because they're not going to question... if you say it happened, most people tend to work from the basis that, okay, but that sounds... okay, if you're telling me it happened, it happened. Now, if you push it too far, they go, but that sounds a bit outlandish. That doesn't seem likely at all. And that's when they'll question it. But if it's a normal story, which as most of the business stories you use in business are not about extraordinary things, they're about everyday things that happen to the employees, to the customers, then unless they have any reason to doubt your credibility or or the time you're arriving home and how you smell, then they will take that, as you say, at face value, because otherwise they're just thinking you're dishonest, and I don't think that's surprisingly, that's not what most people start out as.
Yeah, well, as I learned actually, there's a bit of psychology at play here in the fact that people accept what you say in a story without challenge. And for a marketer, and I'm also clear to say this as well, we have to use this concept ethically. But as a marketer, for whatever you say in a story to be accepted without challenge is huge. It's incredible. And when I learned that, I got very excited by that. But I looked into this a bit more, and what I discovered is that unsubstantiated claims, particularly marketing claims, or anything we deliver as fact, are prime triggers for what's known as pushback. And pushback is it happens when we encounter something which is at odds, which we currently know or believe to be true. So if I hit you with a fact, then if that's not what you currently believe, then what happens? You actually stop from being in story listening mode, and then you set about in your own mind working out why that fact doesn't compute, is not true, and how and why it's at odds with what you're saying. So in a marketing context, if your audience then flips into analytical mode, you've lost them. The sale is completely on hold until they've got this out of the way. Whereas when you deliver that as a story, that bypasses that pushback filter, and you're good to go.
I guess it's because when you're talking to someone and you're giving them information, you are trying to give them a piece of the puzzle of the world. When you're telling a story, you're giving them a piece of the puzzle of your world. So if I say, oh, this is what marketing is, and you have a different opinion about marketing, I'm now arguably contradicting your views of marketing. If I say, oh, in my experience, I was in this agency and this type of stuff, we were trying this stuff and it never really worked, and you have had success with that, you're probably thinking, oh, strange, because for me that worked. You're not questioning what I'm saying. Go, oh, interesting, because my experience with that was different than yours. Whereas if I say that doesn't work, you go, no, actually that does work. I know for a fact that works.
That's a really good example of that exact concept in action, yeah.
Yeah, and I like the pushback term you use. I've heard other people say this, and I've repeated it often as well, which is that most of what we do is we push information out, we push opinions out, we push our own thoughts out to other people. And that gets pushback, as you said. Whereas what a story does is a story is not a push strategy, it's a pull strategy. So here are the facts as I understand them, do what you want with them. And then people they don't get defensive. They just go, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, no, I can say, that's where it comes strange, from. But yeah.
I've got to give credit, by the way. I actually got that principle from the book Secrets of Question-Based Selling.
Okay.
And fantastic book. It's an early 2000s book on sales. And in that book, and I'm struggling to remember the author's name, but it's definitely called Secrets of Question-Based Selling. He says that the only two things which bypass a person's pushback filters are questions and stories. The only two things. So, yeah, total credit for him. And he goes into that in beautiful detail in the book. But fantastic find.
Yeah, the question, a lot of people like, if you're telling them that if you ask a question, the mind has to answer, right? Or the mind completes the picture. There's the famous example of, don't think of an elephant. And I remember I did this in a speech once where it was about that type of subject. And I said to everyone, okay, I'm going to ask everybody to, close your eyes now, try to clear your mind. And whatever you do, don't think of me naked. The room broke down. And I said, keep your eyes closed. I'm definitely not naked. I'm not taking my... And then people were just getting very nervous that maybe I was taking my clothes off while they had their eyes closed. But yeah, it's 100% the case. I think we are answering questions even if we don't want to answer the question. I think it's just that's just how the brain works. And with story, I don't think it's that, but with story, I think it's just that you've now given me something that is true. Assuming I don't think you're a liar, you've now given me something that is true. If that doesn't match with my understanding of the world, I now have to find a way to deal with that. Whereas I could just disregard your opinion as an opinion. So,
yes, actually, opinions was the other thing. Yeah, opinions and facts are the two things we push back on.
Yes.
But yeah, powerful stuff.
Yeah. So, your approach is very specific because, and this is something perhaps I should have mentioned earlier. So you are, podcast aside, you're a video guy. So most of your expertise comes in video, and most of the work you've done is in video. So what you've gone and decided to do is set up a very specific service where you're helping people create these story selling case studies. But it's a video only thing. I mean, I guess they can have other uses for it once they have it, the content. But what you're doing is the video, right? Like everything that involves writing it and filming it, and correct?
Yeah, a complete done for you video case study service.
Right. So my question there is, because you talked about a formula before, and there are plenty of storytelling formulas out there, and you've gone for something very specific that is not the specific that almost everybody goes to. So almost everybody goes to the hero's journey as the most famous, the one that every single Pixar movie is based on, or most of them are. Star Wars was based on that, and it's the traditional thing of you're in the ordinary world, then there's a problem, a call to adventure, you don't want to take it, a guide comes in and convinces you to and supports you along the way, you struggle a lot, at some point you look like you're going to lose, but then you don't, and then your friends help you, and at some point you get stronger, you get transformed by the experience, and you're going to go back to your ordinary world having changed and now take all this knowledge back. So that's the one that most people tend to use when they try to use some sort of formula for storytelling in marketing or sales. You've gone for something more specific, which is one of the 7 basic plots, which comes from a book from Christopher Booker.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's never heard this, so in his book, Christopher Booker says that they're all stories they can fit into 7 basic plots, and they are overcoming the monster, rags to riches, which is like a Cinderella story, quest, so you're going out to find something, so maybe Raiders of the Lost Ark, voyage and return, which I'm trying to think of a movie now, but I'm sure there's plenty of movies when they go to a strange land and come back.
Yes.
Comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. And rebirth, I think I would say the foundation myth of Christianity, or Jesus is or the Lion King are pretty good examples of. I think Lion King is better than the Jesus one, but better singing at least. But that's a clear example of rebirth, whereas you die and then you come back to life, more powerful.
Scrooge, that's the other famous one. Rebirth.
Is it counted as rebirth? That
Yeah,
it could be. Yeah,
starts up a certain way, encounters a series of revelations, and then comes out a better person.
Yeah, true. Okay, so there's 7 of them.
Yeah,
and some of them clearly wouldn't be suitable for marketing. And I got a really interesting opinion on that from the guy J.J. Peterson from Storybrand.
Oh yes,
and he said that you should never use comedy if your brand is either a luxury brand or is trying to come across as an expert or authority brand, because that just doesn't work. That you cannot make those things work. But I was surprised when you said that there is one that is 100% the best one, or at least for what you're trying to do, and is overcoming the monster. So how did you come to that conclusion?
Wow, that's a good question. Right, so I love that actually that you managed to just reel off all the 7 different formulas.
They're written in front of me, James. I have notes. I mean, I know most of them, but I'll always forget 1 or 2, and then I'll spend 3 minutes going, "Oh crap, it was 7, but I can only remember 5." So I have notes.
Clearly, you've learned well from your guest on your show the other week, where you had the magician. So right, that's all part of the setup. All right.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Great stuff. You're so on the money with the fact that it's the hero's quest. Is the one that everyone focuses on, and it's the best known. And I've got to say, this was a development process. The part of coming up with this formula is what I worked on all throughout last year. So, coronavirus is kicking off and everything. I was busy learning about all this storytelling lark. And at first I thought, right, cool, the hero's journey sounds like a good plan. But because I'm always reminding myself, as we've done twice already on the show already, that it's always about the customer. You know, it's about how they see the world and what's in it for them. I thought, you know what? If I'm looking for a story structure, the hero's journey doesn't quite fit. It's close. It's pretty good. But it's missing a few things. So I experimented around with it, and I mapped out the core elements of the formula for the hero's journey. And whilst it was okay, it didn't quite hit the requirement to be able to help the buyer with their research process. And then for the marketer, for them to ultimately make a business point and business case in their favour. So then I started looking into overcoming the monster, and then like a mini epiphany moment, I went, aha, because of course the whole concept with overcoming the monster story formula is that the story's hero encounters a challenge or problem, which is either a threat to himself or his homeland. He then has to take action to set about overcoming this threat, encounters a series of challenges and setbacks along the way, before at the end rising victorious against all odds against the monster, which was a threat at the start. And I thought, you know what, that's actually a much better rough format and structure for delivering case studies.
And I guess that what that will probably do is that it will have the added advantage of helping companies frame because the monster has to be an enemy, and the enemy in that particular case should be the customer's problem. I guess that's
yes.
what that ends up being the case, which is what Steve Jobs did very well when he had, every presentation he ever did involved heroes and villains. The hero wasn't always Apple, but it was something that Apple had created. The one difference for him, which might or might not fit your structure, is that the villains that he had were often just very common, basic things. So it could be IBM, or a company that was meant to look like IBM in that famous commercial that they had, or it could just be, the grief of having to carry around cables and try to keep stuff updated between your computer, between your iPod, between your iPad, and all this malarkey. So, but he always had heroes and villains in all his presentations, and you can do the hero's journey without having a very clear villain. I guess it all depends on how you frame it.
Yes, you're right. You can, but the overcoming the monster has got more relevant conflict and contrast for telling this kind of story. I'm
not questioning you. It's just that I personally haven't done anywhere near as much learning and practice with those structures, because most of what I do, so I'm not going to say that what you do is fiction, because it's not, but you are crafting that story, and that's what I think is really the difference between a testimonial and something like you're doing. The testimonial is often nowhere near as crafted. It might be slightly directed. If you ask the customer a few questions, they can just tell me about this, this, and that, but you're not crafting it. You're not trying to put it in a cohesive narrative. And a lot of the stories that I tell and that I tell people to tell, they're smaller. They don't take a great deal of crafting. So you're not changing the structure of it, usually. You just, this element's more important than that element, just highlight this other than that. But it's not the hero's journey would just complicate the hell out of it for people. And they would look at it and go, but this is all that happened. This was happening. I did this, I did that, and that happened after. Like, how do I fit in the 7 points into here? So I don't use the hero's journey a lot, but I know a lot of people that use it very successfully. Storybrand, who we've mentioned before, being one of those examples.
Yes, and I love their book as well. In fact, that Story Selling was their book, and
I think it was the book? It was called
Building a Story Brand.
Building a Story Brand. Yes.
Donald Miller. Yes. Super important book as well. With the testimonials, just skipping on to that briefly, what I've certainly noticed in all my years of doing this, because I've been in video production for 23 years now. And testimonials are very much a bread and butter element of video production. But typically what you will find is that producers or video producers like doing the fun stuff when it comes to video, which is filming. That's the best part, right? And then you've got editing and crafting it afterwards. But the big thing that most people miss out on is the element beforehand, the planning. And if you don't properly plan, for example, a testimonial, what you'll end up with is on the day when you're sat down with the person to be interviewed, they will ask a series of questions and they'll be basically hoping that they will come up with a nice answer. And that's the industry standard way of doing things, hoping that they'll come up with a good answer. It's understandable, but that's not on. And this is another thing that really bugged me, and I've since worked on to find a solution to it. And the solution is that you need to work with, first of all, the client, the vendor, to find out what was special about that potential testimonial giver. What's the proper word for that? Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Give her a right.
What's that?
Testimonial, yeah.
Witness? No, that's crime. Yeah. I'm sure there is a word for someone who gives a testimonial, but I'm sure we can roll on without it.
See, this is where an A-level in English would have come in so handy. But right, okay, I'll get back on track. So, before you do the testimonial, this is the way that I do it, and I fully recommend that everyone else adopts this as well. Is that you need to sit down with the client beforehand and ask, right, what was special about the service that they got, and what were the various touch points that really mattered to them, and what are the things that you really want to highlight that was a real win for you in helping that customer. And this is when the client will say, well, actually, you know what? Because we had to get around this particular problem with that customer, we did this. Now, other companies wouldn't have normally done that, but we did. And that meant that the client had delivery of the service or the product well ahead of schedule, and we actually saved them £354,000. So that's a big win. So what you then do is that with these particular wins that the client says that are important to that particular end customer, you then reverse engineer questions to lead ultimately the person who you'll be interviewing to talking about that. And what happens then is that the person giving the testimonial will then cover that in their own words, and then they will be covering something very, very specific and also incredibly benefit-driven, which is a wonderful thing, because when a potential future customer is watching this testimonial, what they see is this customer saying, well, actually, the delivery time frame was brought ahead of schedule because they covered this and they took care of that. So then that's a win for everyone all around. The viewer gets a much better understanding of why they should trust and work with that customer, with that vendor, because this testimonial featured person is, in their own words, being very specific, and that doesn't normally happen if you just ask loose, open questions and hoping for the best.
True. Yeah. And I have a feeling now you're gonna feel the need to find out what that word is.
I know, right?
I think it might actually be witness, but that's not. I mean, we're just gonna have to say customer, because nothing else is gonna sound remotely connected to what we're talking about.
Yes. You know what? Right. I think let's go with customer, because a lot of the time, and marketers are guilty of this, of coming up with jingo and acronyms and all of this stuff, where in actual fact,
like just avatar.
Oh my God! Yeah, just anytime you can bring it back to how it really is a wonderful thing, and I do believe that audiences and customers appreciate it when you speak in real plain language,
which is one of the most basic definitions that I use when I'm explaining to people what a story actually is in a business context. A story is a real life example that you use to make a point. That's it. And the basic technique that I give them is that how most people do is they give an explanation. The explanation is not overly clear, and then so the other person has to say, "Can you give me an example?" So I'm saying is just invert those things. Give the example first, and then, if needed, you give your long-winded explanation about the theory and whatever. And often the example is just going to be enough for them to understand what the hell you're talking about, because you're probably using real language, you're talking about real people. Just like, oh yeah, I had this customer and he did this, that, and that's what happened. Okay, I get it. It's like, it's just a more... I've seen a lot of people talk about this as one of the things that storytelling does is humanize business, which sounds kind of fancy to me, but it's essentially you're just making sure there's an actual human being into whatever you're talking about. And strangely enough, most businesses fall foul of the opposite, which is there's no real person anywhere near the product or the explanation or sometimes even the adverts. It's all about features and benefits and all this other stuff that supposedly everybody knows doesn't sell.
And that is the ultimate justification and motivation, really, for marketers now moving towards storytelling and adopting storytelling. Because if you don't, then everything's very synthetic is the word that comes to mind here. It's artificial, yes, yeah, and you can't connect with that. So the marketers who are going to do the best are the ones that factor in and really work towards adopting storytelling in their marketing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and that's the torch I'm carrying.
Nice.
I just wanted to ask you one more question on the structure, because the structure is, and I have it in front of me before, a static memory, but it's a hook, the hero, pain or desire, tension, complication, contrast, solution, transformation, and the business point. And I wanted to ask, because most of them are sort of self-explanatory, I just wanted to ask about point number 6, contrast. So what do you mean there by contrast?
Sure. Would you mind if we went through them just so that everyone is definitely up to speed with this? So, when you've got a formula, that I'm a big fan of them because it's the key to repeatable results, repeatable and reliable results as well, and that now more than ever is really important. So the first element that you have to have. So this is, by the way, for everyone to set this out. This is my 9-step story selling formula specifically created for case studies, which was adapted from the most successful movie formula of all time, which is Overcoming the Monster. So of the 9 steps then, the first one is hook. The case study has to have a strong hook right from the beginning. And what you will notice with a lot of case studies is that they just start droning. And you're bored from the beginning. If you bore your audience in the first 10 seconds, they're not going to watch the rest of it. So you have to have a compelling hook, and you have to work at this right at the top, at the beginning of your case study, because you need to quickly communicate why this case study is of relevance and of interest, and what the viewer is going to learn from it. So that's why it's very clear that.
Can you give me an example of the type of thing that you would use or people should use for a hook?
So it would be teasing the challenge that they were up against and giving a flavour of what's to come, but without giving the answer.
So a trailer and not...
Exactly, yes. Goodness knows that the movie industry and very much now any series on Amazon or Netflix leverages that perfectly. The hook at the beginning makes or breaks the entire thing, and is the reason why you do or do not watch.
Yes.
Then after that, then you've got to introduce the hero. Now, I love the concept that people don't really care about what you have to say about your product or service, but they would invariably love to hear a story about how someone in a similar position to them had a problem or need similar to their own, and to then follow that hero. So the concept of the whole thing is about making your customers the heroes of your marketing stories. That way, you're never talking about yourself, and also you're shining the spotlight on a never-ending number of potential heroes or potential stories. Right? It then makes it a lot more compelling and interesting. So step number 2 is hero. Step 3 is pain and desire. We need to understand and closely associate with the pain that the hero is experiencing, or the desire that they have in terms of change that they want to adopt, or the place where they want to get to. So that's understanding it. The 4th step is tension. Now, as you know, without tension, it's a bland passage of time. The tension's massively important to the story. And in a B2B case study, tension would be in the form of a pressing deadline, the need to increase profitability, or threat of legal action, for example, or prosecution if this thing is not sorted. Then after that, you got the complication. So the complication then throwing the whole thing into jeopardy as to whether or not the hero will be successful on their ultimate journey. And then then we get to contrast. Now, contrast, I'm really excited about this part, because this is something that sales teams will be massively appreciative of. So contrast does one of two things when we're talking about this in the context of the B2B case study. First of all, it lets you highlight a key area of your product or service and the value that it brings. And the larger, more compelling element of contrast is that it helps you tackle and handle price objections in advance. So
how so?
So this is in regard to the cost, the potential cost of lost opportunity, or the value which product or service ownership brings. So, for example, this element of contrast lets you cover, okay, if you don't get this problem sorted, you're going to be exposing yourself to at least £5.2 million worth of downtime and stoppages over the course of the next 3 years. But seen as our widget only costs £150,000, and it's guaranteed then to never let you suffer any downtime from that. That's £3.2 million pales in significance contrast to the £150,000 price of your product. So then price is no longer an object. Your sales team is then, oh, thank you. You've covered that for us in advance, and price is no longer a problem when you cover that from a contrast point of view.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. And then how? Because so the solution, and I think it's fairly obvious. The
yes. Yeah.
To me, it's fairly obvious. So the business point, because if the solution and the transformation are not the business point, what are you covering on that business point? Is that more like a call to action?
Yes. It's the takeaway that you want the viewer to have. Now, this can either be a core element of your overall sales pitch, and a core element of the body of knowledge that is necessary for a customer, for a prospect to have before they become a customer, or it's your all-encompassing case for why they should choose you, and ultimately why you are able to help them better than anyone else can. What I've noticed is that case studies typically just miss this part, and it's really missing an opportunity, because if you think that because you've taken them on a storytelling journey throughout this process, through steps 1 to 8, they've bought into the hero, the problems that the hero is experiencing. They followed the hero through the highs and the lows, the challenges and everything along the way. They've seen them realize the solution and then see it brought to life. So at this point, they're hyper receptive to the very next thing that you say. They're fully locked into storytelling mode. So why would you not leave them with a final big finale rather of the business point that you need to make? So it's making sure that you don't waste the opportunity.
Okay, so in the example you sort of alluded to, so we were talking about contrast, and you said, okay, so you have all this downtime. This downtime is costing you all this much, but if you had this widget which costs you this much, then you wouldn't have this problem. So I, let's say in that story, the hero, which would be the customer, gets the widget. The widget solves all their problems. What would be the business point that comes after they've now solved all their problems, for example?
It would be unique to the business, but using this as a case example, it would be if the vendor's main point of difference is the fact that they will do whatever it takes to make sure that this customized widget is how to describe it. If their main point of difference is the fact that they will do anything and whatever it takes to get that delivered on time and fitted to their processes or their machinery, then that's what we cover or recover in the final business point. You could even repeat what has already happened, but what's important is that you make it clear, and this is ironically what I'm failing at doing right now.
I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
I think one thing we didn't cover on the recording up to this point is that you as you said, this is I think the first time you've ever guested on a podcast. Although you've done hundreds and hundreds of episodes of your show, you're not the one being asked the questions usually. So.
This is true, yes.
It's taken me this long to get you flustered. So.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's funny, because I do spend a lot of my time script writing, and the wonderful thing about script writing is that you get time to map out, give it a first draft, and then refine, and then you only publish it when it's completely fine. But yeah, you're right. With this officially being my first ever podcast interview with me on the other side of the camera, it's you don't get the luxury of refining and crafting.
And also, I'm asking you something that is dependent on a whole bunch of different conditions, and we've not fleshed out any of them. To be fair, sometimes I have to give examples of the types of things you'd say in a story sometimes, and I blank because I hadn't. If it's a very specific situation that I've come across a million times, then I have the story. If it's not, then it's like because I'm a terrible fiction writer. I'm a good storyteller, terrible at writing fiction. So unless I have the actual example at the tip of my tongue, it doesn't come. So
yes,
which is why I when I'm a guest, I don't usually have notes. But as a host, I always have notes, because if I depend on my memory, then we could be here for a long time.
Well, you know what? So now that you could give me a second to kind of assimilate that. So one of my favorite clients is a renewable energy investment firm, and using them as a case example. So for one of their case studies, their main claim to fame, if you will, is the fact that they've got an incredibly skilled team for actual maintenance and installation of the assets. So these are wind turbines, and it's a really, really specialized field to safely install and then maintain them on an ongoing basis. And the benefit for that is that their assets are constantly producing optimal levels of electrical output because they've got all the processes in place. So in their case, the business point which you'd want them to take away for step 9 of the case study is the fact that, look, if you are principally concerned with reliable energy output and with that consistent and stable returns, this is why Glenmont Partners are your ideal choice of investment management. Yeah.
Okay. got it.
That was off the top of my head, but yeah, there we go.
Good. Okay, James, you've just launched the company. It's storyhero.uk is the website. To find more about you, other than your company website, where should they go?
Well, I've spent so much time on storyhero.uk. I would say there and only there. And if you'd like some marketing knowledge, insights, and wisdom, then the 414.net is my podcast. But yes, there we go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, James. I hope it wasn't too harsh on you, this first podcast. And thanks again for your time and for doing this, man. I appreciate the exclusive.
Absolutely. Fantastic. You've been a gentleman and a scholar at the same time. So, hey, look, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. And until next time.